it's what they call an energy crisis in Europe. Just looking at the Dutch gas futures, it's 8 times higher than their 10-year average. How much of this was due to Russia alone?
Well, we shouldn't forget that Putin said, I'm willing to keep supplying oil and gas to Western Europe, but I only have one demand. You should pay me in rubles, in gold, or Bitcoin. And then the Western countries, they said, well, we won't accept that. And that was the reason why Putin closed down the oil and gas to the West. And that has resulted in some kind of market panic, and there was a short squeeze. And now the citizens in Europe are confronted by energy bills, which will be up 3, 4, 5 times compared to last year. And we, the Dutch, are a pretty rich country, but you also have countries in Europe which are much poorer, and this will cause havoc.
How much of the household disposable income is energy? And let's just take the Dutch, for example.
I think within the Dutch, it's quite reasonable. Okay. Maybe it's 10, 15%. Okay. But of course, the poorer, the lower income families are much more harmed by this. But you have countries in Eastern Europe, let's say Bulgaria or Romania or even Poland, where the income not only energy is also food going up. So a lot of people are very nervous about the upcoming winter.
Nervous. Should they be nervous? I mean, I've been reading headlines that, oh my God, people won't make it through the winter. People in Germany are looking up the word firewood. If you look up the German word for firewood in Google Trends, that's been spiking up. People literally cannot afford to pay their electricity bills. This is, how much of this is overblown?
I did a poll on Twitter. Yeah. And I think my followers are more than average well-to-do.
Okay.
Yeah. 25% said it will not affect me in any meaningful way. Another 25% said it keeps me awake at night, and there's 50% who say I expect to have serious problems because of this, and I'm worried. So I was quite shocked about that.
Mortgage rates, are they going up in Europe as well?
Not that much. Not that much. So that's not the problem. In US you see 6%, 6.5%. Yeah. That's very troubling. But it's the full package which is very worrying now. And I think that's also the reason why the Fed can't keep raising rates, what is needed to fight inflation. But there's a huge risk we'll end up.
What exactly, if you break down the consumer price index in Europe, which part of this basket is hitting the consumer the most? Is it energy?
It's energy, of course, energy, because you can choose whether you go on holiday or not. Yeah. You can't choose whether you heat your home or not. Of course, you can. There are especially elderly people who switch off the heating, and what they'll do, they'll join forces. So every night they'll have tea with one of them in one of the houses, and then the other 5 can switch off the heating. So it's a very big problem, and it's not an easy problem to solve for most. They have a fixed income, especially when you're a pensioner.
Yeah, this is difficult to understand for Americans who are not experiencing natural gas prices to the extent, because there's different forms of energy here. You've lived in Europe for a majority of your life. Have you experienced this before?
No, and I think that's what scares me. I've been doing many presentations on topics on monetary reset, financial crisis, and I always told the audience, we should be prepared that one day we'll have a real crisis in our lives. If you study history, every generation has this big crisis, a war, economic crisis, and we never had one. We never had a serious crisis. If you're born after 1945, I was born in 1962, you then had a major crisis. And of course, people who are well-to-do, I took care of myself, and that's the reason why I started to invest in physical gold and silver in the early 2000s, because I've always been scared to the good life.
Let's talk about what happened here, because the natural gas prices started spiking in the last couple of months. because Russia retaliated against the West. Just a few weeks ago, the G7 imposed new sanctions against Russia, which in turn prompted Moscow to basically cut off natural gas supplies to Europe. What is the next move? Do you think the G7 will capitulate, make some concessions? Maybe the Europeans will pressure the Americans to say, look, let's give the Russians something here?
We're entering a dangerous phase in this conflict because Russia is losing the war on the ground in Ukraine. If you watch the Russian television, even there they are openly discussing that they're losing this war. Putin is not a guy who can accept he's losing. So he's a cornered animal in a way. There's even openly criticism within Russia now towards Putin. So what will he do? And I think the next few weeks will be decisive. And I also speak experts who say we shouldn't be too scared about the coming winter because Putin might, within Russia they might solve the. But we don't know. I don't know either.
Well,
but it's a dangerous phase.
The common person in Europe is just wondering when their energy price or energy bills will return to normal.
That's the only thing they talk about now.
Yes.
And many of them say we will stop paying. And they look to the government, and the UK, the new UK Prime Minister already said, I will cover the extra cost. France is pivoting towards such a subsidizing of energy costs. So I think we'll see a lot of money printing.
Yes.
And that's the reason why the euro goes down that much, because there's a huge crisis developing within Europe, also within factories who use a lot of energy.
Yes.
And then you have the money printing, which will start to happen again. And that puts a lot of pressure on the euro and the whole euro system.
Well, the subsidies in themselves could create a problem. I think it was brought up in a panel here at the conference that if you subsidize energy, people will just use more of it, creating more of a shortage, right?
Oh yeah, it's a different balancing act for governments. But you know how governments are. If the pressure becomes too large and people start to demonstrate and revolt, because issues in the Netherlands. And I think when this energy crisis pushes people to the brink, you could have mass demonstration, even riots, and governments are afraid of that, so they'll choose the easy way, and that's print money.
Yeah, it has been proven, well, not proven, but discussed in academic research that economic instability has led to social unrest. Okay, so let's assume the government doesn't fix this problem. Let's assume that there's no peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. We'll touch on that. And the energy prices stay high. People can't afford to live the way they used to. What is the next logical step in this progression? What will people do?
I think you'll have social unrest. You'll see a huge rising crime. You know, nowadays it's very easy to walk into a supermarket and leave without paying. Because
migration from Europe?
There are huge problems. There are huge problems with refugees. We have a very social policy towards refugees compared to Australia and the US. So now in Holland, there's a huge discussion because if a refugee comes into our country and we check his credentials and we say you're a real refugee, we give you a home, we give you homes anymore. So that builds up real tension. And maybe you followed what happened in Sweden with the elections. There was a huge shift from the left to the right.
Do you think
that's the risk as well?
Do you think there will be mass migration away from Europe? Will Europeans think,
no,
enough with this, let's move to America, Asia?
No. But I'm worried about this winter. But when this conflict isn't solved, and when this conflict is turning more and more towards a World War III type of conflict between the East and the West, maybe it's not a shooting war, but it's a financial economic war in a way. So Even the Pope warned about World War III because there's such huge tension. And then I'm worried what will happen in the next winter, not this winter, but the next winter.
You're talking about literal winter, not figurative economic winter.
Yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay, let's talk about this potential World War III, because like you mentioned, we are in an economic war that we talked offline about is unprecedented. Even during the Cold War, I didn't see both sides imposing sanctions on each other, potentially using cyber technology and hacking, and causing major disruptions in the supply chain, boosting energy prices up to the point of becoming unaffordable. Yeah. You've never seen this before, have you?
No, and I think it's a big trend change. Of course, we had a Cold War, as you said, in the 1950s, a six-star system. They all became capitalist in a way. And that was the best part of world history, maybe. And now, you know, it started with the economic war of President Trump against China. Yeah. It started with the actions against Huawei. We have a Dutch company, ASML. They make the best machines to produce chips, computer chips. They're not allowed to export them to China anymore. And I think we're on the path of more conflict. And it's a path of deglobalization. And it's even a path away from the old Bretton Woods system in which we all supported paper assets, treasuries, towards a system in which we are going to look to hard assets and commodities and maybe even gold.
This is a quote from Charles Gave, who is a French financier. This is a quote from a book by Ronnie Peter Stoffler, the In Gold We Trust report. Yeah. The world is breaking into two distinct economic zones, the empire of the sea, or the Western bloc of nations, and the empire of the land, or the Eastern bloc. The former's currency is based on fiat money, and the latter, the Eastern bloc, is based on the emerging tandem of commodities, gold and oil. Tell us about this development.
He's now the strategist for Credit Suisse. He published 4 essays since the start of the Ukraine war. Mm-hmm. You can find them online. And he calls this the start of Bretton Woods 3.0. So Bretton Woods 1.0, that was 1944, the start of the US dollar system. Yes. Then you had Bretton Woods 2.0, was in 1971, when the dollar was taking off the gold standard. And now, according to Zoltan Pozsar, we're entering Bretton Woods 3. And he also calls this a move away from, collecting paper assets, investing in US treasuries. And he even goes a step further, and he says a new monetary system based on commodities and gold. And we used to have this old saying, it's our currency and your problem, that was pointed to the US dollar. And now he says, it's our commodities and your problem. So we used to have the just-in-time deliveries for commodities. And now you have the just-in-case deliveries of commodities. You should build your own reserves of commodities. And that's a huge change.
One could argue that basing currency on a hard asset like gold is not a new monetary system. To make it completely new and to de-dollarize, we should move towards a digital form of a backing. Back it by either a crypto or a Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a type of crypto, but another type of crypto, or perhaps a new form of digital assets. Why is that not being talked about by the BRIC nations?
Well, before this crisis, before the Ukraine war, we were all looking at the financial system and telling each other that the next phase would be the arrival of central bank digital currencies. And we thought that would be the new phase and in a way a monetary reset. And then the war started. And now we have the BRIC countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, Argentina just joined them. The Saudis have said they might join them. Now we have a group of over 140 countries who are not supporting the Western sanctions. So we only have a few dozen countries, the Western countries, who apply the sanctions on Russia. But the majority of the people live in countries, 6 billion people live in countries who don't support the sanctions. And we could have a move away from our dollar-based system to a system which is introduced by the BRICS countries, and they will say we will use our own system from now. And we see the first indications. We see the the trading between the BRICS nations, in which Russia is supplying cheap energy to India and China, and India and China are paying with their own currencies. They're not paying with dollars anymore. So I see this as the very first stage of a move away from this dollar system.
Let's back up and examine why these 140 countries do not support the sanctions. You would think that they would like to align with still the world's most powerful economy, but that's not the case.
They're fed up with the double standards of the US.
Okay.
They're fed up with the double standards of the West. When the US invaded Iraq, when the US invaded Afghanistan, we didn't have sanctions against the US. So it's a world of double standards, and I live in the West, and I have a good life in the West, but I can't close my eyes for all the negative developments, and we in the West are so arrogant.
Thank you for watching. We also have a massive giveaway for the 100th subscriber. A $50 gift card will be awarded to the 100th subscriber. Make sure you subscribe. See you on the next one.